Imagine one night for a moment. You're 25 years old. You're sitting in the darkness, somewhere on the Ice Age steppe. The wind outside is so fierce it feels like it's peeling the earth itself apart. You don't have walls in the way we think of them today. No roof that can stand on its own. There's only a fire, one that's about to go out unless someone throws on more wood. And there are people beside you. Whether all of you survive until morning depends on the warmth of their bodies. You don't know if there will be food tomorrow. You don't know if the smallest member of your group will survive the night. But you know one thing for certain. Winter has no mercy. It doesn't strike once and then retreat. It presses in from all four sides at once, with cold, with darkness, with hunger, and with the loneliness of the longest night of the year, again and again, every year, for tens of thousands of years. Humans have no fur, no claws, no hibernation. By every biological measure, we're one of the worst species on Earth for surviving a real winter, and yet our ancestors didn't just survive. They went where winter was at its cruelest, into Ice Age Europe, into Siberia, into places where the temperature dropped so low that a naked human body would die within hours. How? How did a species for which the cold should have been the end of the story turn winter into its training ground and come out of it smarter, stronger, and more united than when it entered? Let's start with the most obvious enemy, the cold itself. And here's a fact that surprises a lot of people. The human body is essentially a tropical machine. Our species evolved in the warm climates of Africa. Our entire physiology is adapted to warmth, not to the cold. Leave a person naked in the cold, and the body begins to fail almost immediately. Blood retreats from your limbs to protect your vital organs. Your fingers lose feeling within minutes. Your thinking slows. Your reactions slow. Hypothermia can kill in just a few hours, sometimes before you even realize it. We don't have a thick undercoat like a wolf. We don't have a layer of fat beneath the skin like a seal. We have none of the traits nature usually gives species that live in cold climates. And yet this poorly adapted species chose not to retreat from the cold, but to walk straight into it. The first and most obvious solution was fire. Humans gained control of it astonishingly early, and it became the first line of defense against the cold. But fire has one fundamental flaw. A flaw that makes it almost useless once you're outside the cave or camp. It only warms the side of your body facing the flames. Take just 10 steps away to gather firewood, to hunt, to fetch water, and the cold returns instantly, as if the fire had never existed at all. You can keep a fire alive, but you can't carry it with you, and winter doesn't wait while you sit beside a campfire. It follows you every second, unless you're protected by something that traps the heat around your own body, constantly, whether you're moving or standing still. So humans needed a way to carry warmth with them, and it was that problem, not some abstract desire to dress warmer, forced humans to invent something that seems completely ordinary today. But at the time, it was a true technological breakthrough. For a long time, the solution seemed simple. Take the hide from the animal you hunted, throw it over your shoulders, and that's it. That's most likely how the earliest humans lived for a very long time. The problem is, a hide thrown over your shoulders isn't protection, it's the illusion of protection. It doesn't fit your body, it has no sleeves. The wind moves freely beneath it, from the sides, from below, along your exposed arms. It slips off every time you make a sudden movement. And movement is essential, whether you're hunting or running for your life. A hide thrown over your shoulders is better than nothing, but in a true polar winter, there's a difference between better than nothing and enough to survive, and that difference means life or death. The real turning point came when someone realized they could do more than simply throw a hide over their shoulders. They cut it into pieces and sewed it back together to fit the shape of the human body, sleeves that completely covered the arms, seams that kept the wind out, clothing that trapped a thin layer of warm air right against the skin, and kept it there even while you ran, crouched, or raised your spear. This was no longer just a hide, it was a protective shell. But making that shell required one small object, an object that seems insignificant at first glance, but is actually one of the most underrated inventions in human history, the eyed needle. It wasn't just a sharpened stick, it was a thin piece of bone, carefully carved into a needle only a few millimeters thick, with a tiny hole made in it, not so large that the bone would crack, but large enough to pull a thread through. Archaeologists have found needles more than 40,000 years old. These weren't random fragments. They were precise, carefully made tools, created by people who knew exactly why they needed them. For thread, they used sinew, the strong fibers that connect muscles to bones. It was stretched out, dried, and turned into thread strong enough to hold a seam together for years in the cold. With clothing like this, fur facing inward, tightly stitched, without a single opening, humans were able, for the first time, to create a small personal bubble of warmth, one that no longer depended on a campfire. Without the eyed needle and sinew thread, there would have been no settlement of Ice Age Siberia, no hunters walking through the snow after mammoths in temperatures below -30. This wasn't a luxury, it was a condition for the survival of our species. But here's the catch. Clothing solved the problem of movement. It didn't solve the problem of the night, because sooner or later, you have to stop, lie down, and make it until dawn, and that's when even the warmest fur clothing stopped being enough. You're dressed. The warmth stays trapped beneath your clothes, even when the wind is howling. But daylight fades, the temperature keeps dropping, and you're faced with a problem no jacket can solve. Where do you spend the night? The obvious answer is a cave. And caves really did work. The temperature inside stayed relatively stable. The wind barely reached you. Snow wasn't falling on your head. But here's what people rarely mention about caves. There weren't many of them. A good, dry cave that offered real protection was incredibly rare. And if you found one, there was a good chance someone else had already claimed it. You couldn't rely on finding a cave every time. So if you wanted shelter, you had to build it yourself. And this is where the story becomes truly remarkable. At the site of Mezhyryk, in present-day Ukraine, archaeologists uncovered the remains of dwellings about 15,000 years old. There was almost no forest, almost no stone. There was hardly anything to build with, except for one material that was everywhere: mammoth bones. Dozens of skeletons carefully arranged and interwoven into dome-shaped structures. Hundreds of bones in a single shelter, massive jaws overlapping like roof tiles, enormous tusks arched over the entrance. These weren't crude huts thrown together in a hurry. They were carefully engineered structures, built to survive an entire winter. And that took real planning. Everything inside had one purpose: to hold on to heat. The floors were covered. At one archaeological site in South Africa, archaeologists found traces of bedding made from layers of grass and leaves, carefully laid, 77,000 years old. Long before our species ever left Africa, people were already making their shelters more comfortable, but mammoth bones weren't perfect building materials. They left gaps, and every gap was an open invitation for the wind. So people sealed them, layer by layer. Animal hides were stretched across the inside. More hides were stretched over the openings. Blocks of turf were cut and stacked against the outer walls. Some groups even piled snow over the shelter itself, because thick snow is an excellent insulator. It traps air, and air traps heat. Little by little, the wind simply ran out of places to get in. The shelter stopped being just walls. It became a system, and that system kept people alive through nights that should have killed them. But a well-sealed shelter came with a price, and it was a serious one. To keep a fire burning all winter, you needed fuel, a lot of fuel, which meant someone had to keep walking back out into the freezing cold, again and again, all winter long. You were essentially tied to that place. You couldn't simply wander off in search of food, so food had to be close by, or it had to be stored in advance. And that's where the third, and the most dangerous threat of winter begins. Winter is when the land stops feeding you. It's a fact that modern life has made us completely forget. Plants wither or lie dormant. Berries disappear. Roots freeze so deeply into the ground that digging them out becomes nearly impossible. Many animals migrate, hide away, or become lean, wary, and much harder to catch. For a hunter-gatherer, winter wasn't just about the cold. It was the season when the land itself stopped feeding you, and survival became a matter of simple arithmetic. You had to gather enough during the warmer months to last through the months when almost nothing new could be gathered. A mistake in those calculations cost lives, not figuratively, literally. If your supplies ran out before the end of winter, you would starve long before spring arrived. That's why ancient people became masters of food preservation. The first method was drying. Meat was sliced into thin strips, then left to dry in the sun, or above the gentle smoke of a fire. The moisture disappeared, and without moisture, it became much harder for the meat to spoil. Dried meat could last for months. Smoke added another layer of protection on top of the drying process. But drying had one weak point. In damp climates, or during snowfall, it simply didn't work. The meat couldn't dry fast enough, and it spoiled instead, so people needed another method, and this time, they turned winter itself from an enemy into an ally. Frozen ground works like a natural freezer. Dig a pit into the permafrost, store the meat from a successful hunt inside, and the cold would preserve it for a very long time. The very thing that tried to kill them became the thing that preserved their food. But the most valuable food in winter wasn't meat. It was fat. When your body burns enormous amounts of energy just to stay warm, lean meat alone isn't enough. Fat is the most energy-dense source of calories available to humans. And in the depths of winter, it was worth more than almost anything else. Animal fat was rendered down, turning it into a stable substance that could be stored for a long time. It was mixed with dried meat, creating a dense, calorie-packed food that could be carried with you. In a season where every calorie mattered, fat often determined whether a group would survive until spring or not. Now you're warm, you're sheltered, you have food stored away. 3 of winter's 4 deadly threats have been defeated, but one still remains, and this enemy doesn't attack the body, it attacks the mind. The farther north you went, the shorter the daylight became, and the longer the nights. Sometimes daylight lasted only a few hours, followed by 15 or even 16 hours of darkness, cold, empty, with nothing to do. You couldn't travel far. Hunting in the dark was nearly impossible. You were trapped in a confined space, surrounded by the same people, night after night, and that kind of constant, inescapable waiting could wear a person down more than hunger or even the cold. But here's what ancient people did with those long, dark hours. They didn't just endure them, they filled every moment. It was the time for everything that didn't require daylight: repairing tools, sharpening new spear points, mending clothing before the next season, twisting plant fibers into rope, carving bone. The long night wasn't wasted time, it was a workshop, the hours when the group prepared everything they would need once the weather finally changed. But it was more than work. Around the winter fire, in the darkness, people talked. That's where the elders passed down everything they knew. The same stories were repeated again and again, year after year, carrying the memory and knowledge of the group from one generation to the next. A huge part of what we now call human culture was born in exactly those conditions. Myths, songs, shared knowledge. In 2014, anthropologist Polly Wiesner published a study of conversations among the Juhuansi people of the Kalahari Desert. She found that after nightfall, conversations shifted away from practical topics towards stories, songs, and rituals. It seems that the light of the fire itself changed what people were willing to share with one another. They gathered closer together in the darkness, keeping each other warm, keeping each other sane, remaining human, until the light returned. Winter didn't just test the body, it shaped the mind. Now take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Winter wasn't just something humanity survived. Winter remade us. The cold forced us to invent sewn clothing. The lack of caves gave us true architecture. Hunger led to food storage and preservation. And the long, dark nights became the environment where culture was born. Nearly every technology that allowed humans to spread across the planet was forged in this struggle. The harshest season on Earth didn't destroy us. It made us more capable than we ever had any right to be. Winter had 4 weapons: cold, and we answered it with fire and clothing; a night without shelter, and we answered it with homes built from mammoth bones; hunger, and we answered it with drying, freezing, and fat; darkness, and we turned it into a workshop where culture was born. Every winter was an exam, one that many never passed. Survival had to be earned, again and again, every year. Now look at yourself. You turn a dial, and the room becomes warm. You open your refrigerator, and in the middle of December, it's stocked with food grown thousands of miles away. You've never experienced that kind of fear, the fear of watching the first snow, and wondering whether your supplies would last until spring. You don't survive winter anymore. You barely notice it, not because winter has become milder, but because 100,000 years of people who shivered and huddled together in the darkness, step by step, defeated it so that you would never have to.